Mrs. Audrey Joe-Ezigbo is an experienced leader, business advisor, and coach with a proven track record spanning over 28 years. She has a deep expertise in strategic planning and execution, corporate governance, investor relations, advocacy, entrepreneurship development, and environmental sustainability in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors at executive and board levels. Recognized for her results-driven leadership and counsel in building organizations into world-class top producers, she is Deputy Managing Director and shareholder at Falcon Corporation, a leading, wholly indigenous midstream and downstream energy, gas distribution, and trading company, which she co-founded in 1994. She is passionate about entrepreneurship in Africa and committed to actualizing the potentials of SMEs to become large corporations or multinationals. Mrs. Joe-Ezigbo is committed to building African institutions that can survive and scale sustainably and developing leaders and managers for these organizations who are global in their thinking and networks. Known as the Double Impact Coach, she is the founder and promoter of the Double Impact Platform, a business training and relationship building foundation for entrepreneurial couples in business together. Mrs. Joe-Ezigbo holds several master's degrees in finance, marketing, and business administration from the Lagos Business School, University of Nigeria, and Nnamdi Azikiwe University. She also holds several executive certifications in management, leadership, and governance from Harvard Business School, IE Business School, and the Wimborne Institute. She is married and a mother to 4 amazing young adults. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a kind welcome to Mrs. Audrey Joe-Ezigbo.
You're welcome, my sister.
A very good morning to you, Pastor T.
Yeah, good afternoon to you there. It's good to see you.
Yes, it's good to see you. And well done for this great work. Well done for that.
We thank God. We are ready, so you can take it from here, and then we'll see you after your delivery for the question and answer. Thank you.
Excellent. So everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what part of the world you're watching from. Today I'm speaking about entrepreneurial structure and restructuring. And I think that is really a key topic for the world that we're in today. And whether you're in the developing world or you're in the developed world, one thing that we know is that private sector is key as an engine of economic growth and advancement. And when we look at the world, we see globally an increasing population that is skewed towards the youth. And so the importance of us being deliberate about elevating the level of entrepreneurial development across the world, especially, of course, in our emerging markets, is really key. Private sector is where we see the aggregation of all the entrepreneurial drive, that spirit of industry, that get up and go, and the expression of potential, creativity, vision, purpose, right? So as an entrepreneur, you are literally doing more than just starting a business. You are carving out a process through which you help to identify opportunities, to allocate resources, to create value and solve problems, to meet unmet needs of people. And of course, you create platforms that then are opportunities to change the way that we do life. So I'm very clear about the fact that those of us who are entrepreneurs, especially those of us that are marketplace ministers, because that's really what we are, our assignment is really critical, especially in the world that we are today. Now, I am also somebody who is really passionate about the concept of building legacy. And so even before I started my business, I've been in business now for a little over 28 years. And from the beginning, it was really clear to me that I wanted to build something that was smart, something that was sustainable, something that would live past me. I used to wonder how, when I was in secondary school, we had some phenomenal businesses whose products I love, for instance, and this is one of obviously helping to let you know that I'm a sweet tooth. I remember Obutola biscuits, for instance. I practically lived on their products. And one day they were just not there. So I really couldn't understand that some brands would just disappear. But at the same time, we had brands like Mercedes-Benz, we had Coca-Cola that has been drawn from generation to generation, and there's so many others. And when I looked at them, I saw that these were family businesses. None of them was started by anyone from out of space. It was just people, one person, two, sometimes three, with one head, two eyes, and all that, 2 years. So I felt that there must be something that these kind of people do. There must be systems that are put in place, even though I wouldn't have used the word system back then, but it was clear that these were my benchmarks, that I want to expend my life for the glory of God, to build something that is not going to just be about my, as we say, my lifetime hustle. Why would you hustle all your life and it fritters away because you left? So I really believe that entrepreneurs, and this topic we're discussing today, structure and restructure, is a legacy conversation. It is a legacy conversation. And this is the first thing I want to put on the table, that any entrepreneur that is looking at what they're doing today, no matter how small it is, no matter how many times you think you've gotten it wrong, understand that you are on a legacy journey, that you're literally on that journey where God says, blessed to be a blessing. There's no full stop after that blessing. It is a continuous one, because our God is also a God of generations. So once you stay in that place where you're constantly looking at what is happening in my market, what is happening in my economy, what is happening with technology, how can I leverage on this, what kind of new ideas are coming to me, what does the world need today? When I look at the economy now, technology means that we don't really have boundaries. We've been talking globalization for years. We even moved into that concept of localization, where it's like think global but operate local. Now technology is even bringing down all those walls. And so you have to recognize yourself. I always say that I personally am an embodiment of transformational potential. That means nothing is impossible for me. That means that I just need to find the niche, the assignment God has given me. And in my case, I'm sitting therefore squarely on the mountain place of business. So I just want to speak today, just in a second, on this conversation around structure. One of the problems that we find a lot of the time with entrepreneurs, and it's understandable, many of us, we just have a vision, there's a burning in our heart, and we jump in. We don't necessarily have the resources that we need to create these big, gigantic, great structures from the beginning. And so we tend to make the proverbial same sets of mistakes. When I talk to entrepreneurs today, I find that those kind of mistakes I made back in 1994, I'm still hearing people do the same thing. But I've journeyed past that. And so for me, it's a passion to continuously come back and speak to entrepreneurs, so that even if you're just a year, or you haven't started, but you're thinking to start, or you're 5 years, 3 years, 7 years down the line, you can begin to look at what are some of the traditional errors? Why do we make them? How can I better restructure? Because I think that the conversations to entrepreneurs, especially from a kingdom perspective, is that we're not just talking about growth, where how do I grow, how do I scale, and all that. Is that we're literally talking about taking territory for God. And I'm going to spend maybe a couple of minutes on this. We all know, or we should know, this whole concept of the 7 mountains, right? And those of us who are in enterprise, so it's the mountain of entrepreneurship business. I think that the enemy doesn't want to see enough of the believers, those that carry God's light and life, building large, formidable businesses on that mountain, because immediately we have that kind of capacity, we finance kingdom. And so you have to see yourself on a bigger assignment than just this, I'm just trying to hustle, I'm just trying to make it. No. You are actually on God's assignment. God told me clearly one thing. He said, Audrey, you are a builder of bridges. You are a financier, kingdom financier, a builder of bridges between men and ministries. So I'm very clear that I need to build, I need to continue to grow, scale, structure, restructure, whatever it takes to keep taking territory, because I'm on God's assignment to build the kingdom. So the thing that troubles my heart the most, therefore, becomes, how do we prepare entrepreneurs? How do we position businesses, especially in our emerging economies, but even overseas, especially in the MSME space? How do we position them for that kind of exponential, transgenerational growth, and still build them in a way that glorifies God? And the difference comes into the narrative of institution building. So if we spend a little time, and I'm going to get to structure and all that, but just to think a bit about what it means to build. Building for me is a word that is multidimensional. It speaks to structure, it speaks to development, it speaks to forming, conforming and reforming. So when you think about structure and restructure, it's the same thing we're talking about. To me, building something means working with God. It's a co-creation issue. And to me, that is also embedded in the principle of kairos and chronos. Like there's a time and a season that God positions you and puts resources around you if you're attentive to then take that venture and do greater things. Right? So building to me speaks about expanding your potentials, consistently broadening the opportunities just by the things that you do in that's your enterprise. So we are put on earth to optimize God's purposes, and you must understand that what you are doing, this conversation we're having, is about you leveraging on your platform, the platform of your business, to then be able to fulfill God's assignment. So when you begin to think about this as a person, you understand therefore that even though you're talking about structuring and restructuring your business, the conversation you and I are having today is about how we bring an alignment between our spiritual assignment, our spiritual mission, and the mission of the corporate entity that we're building. That is where we get to the point where our success is a success that is good success. It's a success where kingdom is glorified, and it's a success that then touches on generations. So let's talk about structure. Of course, we know that we can decide to do different things when we're starting a business. And so many of us who are listening, some of us are actually limited liability companies already, but there are some of us who are perhaps still running our businesses as ventures. Right? We don't want to go through the hog of registration and all that. I think that's very strange. I hear some people say things like, oh, when I register the business, I now have to pay taxes. Why are we running away from that? Even Jesus said that we should give to Caesar what is his due, right? So you have to begin to start thinking to yourself, if I want to grow, if I want to scale, if I want to build something sustainable, something that has a legacy that goes past me, then I must be willing to put in place the structure and frameworks that allow me to create that. So let's say you're already running a business or you want to start. What is the first thing we want to look at? Obviously, I will first assume that your mission is clear, that the vision is clear, that you're not just doing the traditional copycat syndrome of, oh, this seems to be successful, let me jump into it. But that literally, this is you and God, you've processed something, is put in your heart and asked you to start. The best way then to begin to look at the business from a structure perspective is to ask yourself, so where is this business going? Which means you want to think about what the business looks like today when you're limited in your resources and capacity, it seems, to where it will go in the next few years when you begin to grow as the Lord helps you, and what it might look like maybe in 10, in 20, 15 years' time, right? And then begin to drill down to what is the organizational chart going to look like? This may seem very basic, but I always like to start this kind of a conversation from here because at the end of the day, when we are in entrepreneurship, some of the mistakes we make stem from just hiring spontaneously. We haven't thought through who we need. We haven't thought through why we need them. We haven't thought through what the exact competencies they are bringing to the table are. And we haven't even thought about their capacity to grow. No matter how early your business is, you want to be sure that you are hiring people that have headroom to grow because they're going to be with you for some time and you'll be investing in them. But the truth is, at some point, some of them cannot go to the next level with you. But what's the point of hiring people whose capacity is already capped? So you want to think about that. The organizational chart, who will I need today? What will the organization look like today? But as I begin to grow and scale, what are some of the competencies that I'm going to need? And then what kind of skills will they be coming in? What kind of attitudes will they be coming in? Then you want to be able to define for the business, what are the departments that will be required? Now, even for where you are, where like many of us started, I was the accountant, I was the marketer, I was my own driver, we all started from there. But there still has to be some vision where you begin to map out what would be the core functions of the department of your organization and create some kind of departmentation scheme. So you're going to need a finance department, even if you don't have it. You're going to need an HR department because you're believing God for growth. So as early as possible, you want to be having a focus on the people element as resources in your business. You're going to have an operations team, you're going to have a quality team, and so on and so forth. I'm taking the context from my industry, which is the energy space, right? Having looked at what are the different departments that I need now, you also want to ask yourself, what might I need later? For instance, like I said, I've been in business now, this is going on almost 3 decades, but it's only I think about 5-6 years ago, that we finally now set up an independent internal audit and control department, because the business had matured into a phase where it could no longer be a function subsumed under other departments. So you want to think about that future and then design that organogram, and importantly, look for what is related so that we don't have issues of personality clashes. Nobody really knows who's responsible for what, and so on and so forth. So there must be a reporting and responsibility matrix. And here's the thing that I find, so that it doesn't sound too high up there. And I'll give an example with the standard operating procedures that you need within your business. Many years ago, I think very early in 2000, I came across, that was when I really heard for the first time the concept of putting in place standard operating procedures within my business. And it made so much sense, because at that point in time, we were always fighting fires. And the typical fire we would fight would be, we can't find the document. There's no filing system. This person said I had it last, the other person said I had it last. But I listened to someone talk about SOPs, and I thought, okay, this makes absolute sense. So we know that there's a procedure even for this document, how it comes in and how it moves around until it is filed, how it is retrieved and recorded, and so on. And so I invited consultants to come and give us the proposal around this. When they brought the kind of bills they brought, at that point in time, we could not afford it. But I knew this was important to our business. And so what I decided to do was I called meetings with every department, whether there were 3 in the department or there were 10. And I sat everybody down. Manually, we started to discuss what happens in your department. And then we were, taking notes until we all had a framework that we agreed on, this is how we do it. Then we called all the departments together and said, okay, when the document leaves admin and goes to engineering, what happens? So we could also create that interconnectedness. And I can promise you that we use those internally generated standard operating procedures for many, many years before we were able to then hire consultants to come and refine based on where we were at that time. The importance of standard operating procedures in our business also is that as entrepreneurs, especially as younger entrepreneurs, right? We have what we call key man risk. We have that all the time in business, but when you're in a sensitive early phase of your business, you may find that you depend so much on some particular competencies. Indeed, you may be a key man risk in your own business. And setting in place standard operating procedures means that you map out what is required for every single job function, such that even if somebody suddenly leaves you, you can hire someone else, even if it's a quick hire that you don't feel is as competent, and you give them a manual and tell them just follow it step by step. These are the kinds of things that create structure, that create institutionalization, and that allow your business to stand and not shake when some things hit on it. Policies are also going to be key. Many times as younger businesses, we're so busy just trying to make the money, trying to make the business grow, that we're not stepping back to ask, what are the core policies of my business? What are my policies around people? What are my policies around working capital, our finances? Do you have a treasury policy? For instance, you have a lot of money sitting in the bank once in a while. Do you know that you can put that money, if you have a policy whereby, say you must never have more than $5,000 in the current account, means that every time you have $10,000, you take the extra 5 and fix it in some kind of investment where it's yielding interest. And that's what we call value creation. So these are some of the things we don't think about from an early point of view, and we keep leaving value on the table. I remember that there was a time here in Nigeria, I think they're very different now, when just by our treasury operations, making sure that every extra cover we had was either in the money market or treasury bills or commercial papers, we were earning a significant amount of revenue just by placing money. Now, in terms of structure, you have to ask yourself also, in terms of my people, in today's world, it's a big conversation. Do I want to own the people or do I want to rent them? And what that means is that outsourcing is a thing. You don't have to put a heavy overhead around your business for you to say, I'm running a company. These are the days of cost optimization. These are the days of looking for efficiencies. So part of looking at your structure is looking at that model to say, what do I need to own? What do I need to rent in terms of my asset? And this includes my people. But of course, if you're going to rent people, we expect part of your structure is that there will be proper contracts with whoever is providing those resources, and everything is well documented and signed off. Indeed, even with the people that you own, that is your full-time hire, pardon the word own, it's just industry lingo. Those people who work for you, part of structure is making sure they have clear job descriptions, employment letters, and their lines of communication are clear. In looking at your business structure, you want to be asking yourself things like, what kind of technology can I use to support my business? And okay, if you're an early stage entrepreneur, it could be expensive. But again, we're in an era where there are a lot of free resources within limits or some less expensive software that can help you to create efficiencies and take away some of the things that create problems within the system. Remember, in my view, and I hold this very strongly, your business is the kingdom platform. Therefore, you don't want to do shabby, you don't want to do shoddy, because God is a God of excellence. And whatever tools He has given us in today's world at our disposal to do things in our excellent best way, we must leverage on them. Part of your structure is looking at things like your supply chain. Where are the efficiencies? Where do I need to put what in place, right? Some people are actually going as far as doing partnership instead of doing a direct backward or forward integration. You just want to have a partner who is maybe at one level of your value chain, and you people create those kind of synergies that create value for both people. So look at your supply chain. Ask yourself something. This is a big part of structure. It's a governance conversation, and I'm going to come to that in a bit more detail. What are the licenses and permits that you require in this business at the stage where you are now and for later? You don't want to grow and be at some point, what will hook you is that you didn't conform. And besides, your reputational equity is really key. The biggest part of which is that you are brand Jesus in the marketplace. So we don't want to be the ones building these things that start having integrity issues because we're not complying with the permitting and licensing structure that undergird our businesses. You also want to look at, like I said, internal controls, because many things happen within that time where as entrepreneurs we're running to make things happen. We're dealing with many people, and even as our businesses begin to grow, many times is where we begin to see slippages because we're not totally in control anymore. So you want to begin to step back and think, where are the points where there might be difficulty, where there may be control issue, even in terms of communication with the external world, that may be a problem for the business. So some of the elements and things that underpin a sustainable corporate structure is one, your strategy, like I said. So you have the mission, you have the vision, but you need to sit down, pull a team together. It's your team internally, but also I think in today's world, we have a lot of resources that are available for you to do a serious brainstorming and strategy session, where you're looking at it, whether it's from, we used in my company, the balanced scorecard approach. So you're looking at it across different dimensions, the impact on your financials, your customers, your policies, your internal capacity, and all those things. Think about the business strategy. Today, we find that because of COVID and all that, we're still dealing with there are too many undulations. You want to find that fine balance between being a structured business and still maintaining a flexibility that allows your strategy to adapt. And that doesn't happen without you sitting down and processing some of these things that I'm saying. You want to think about the objectives of your business. What do you want to achieve in this particular year? So how many of us are able to do a 5-year strategic planning? That's really important to structure because things keep coming your way. And if you don't have the capacity to say, no, this is not in alignment with where we're going, you'll be distracted, doing many things and never quite going anywhere. I remember when I started my business, we were literally just looking for opportunities everywhere. And I think we were a bit of a jack of all trades at that point in time until, thank God, we began to kind of hone in on something. And today we're one of the biggest names in gas in Nigeria. You want to pay attention to, like I said earlier, your people, your talent management. How are you building your people? I find a lot of the time as early entrepreneurs, and sometimes even when we've matured a bit, we are still the be-all and end-all in our business. Decisions can't be taken without us. We are the ones that need to sign everything. And we're very proud of the fact that we carry all the institutional knowledge and we know how to do things best. I want to ask us to just step back and look at the Jesus model, because Jesus actually literally was empowering his disciples to the degree that at some point he's telling them that, look, greater works, go ahead and do greater. And this is the model we're supposed to follow. I've heard it said many times that if your business is structured in such a way that you must be there every single second, then actually you don't have a business, you're not running a business, you have a job. So, we want to think about how we empower our people. It's part of your structure conversation. A lot of the time, yes, you hear people say, oh, you empower them and they leave, you train them and they leave. My personal philosophy is that our assignment is to build people. And if those of us who are entrepreneurs at different levels, all focused on training and capacity building, what it actually means is that there's a larger pool of people who are competent that we can pull from to replace those that we lose. But if we don't train, one, we get sub-optimization internally, and ultimately someone else will poach them and invest in them, and it's still a loss at the end of the day. Part of your focus on building structure is looking at that continuous improvement mindset. Is it embedded within your organization? Are you stuck on this is how we do it and there's nothing better? Every time I employ a new person, the first thing I say to them is, look, I know we're already a very well-established business, but you're coming with a lot of experience from a different industry, a different organization, and I expect you to come and add value. So I expect that you can look at a system, look at a process and say, you know what, based on where I'm coming from, if we tweak this a bit, we can do this better, we can do this faster, we can do this at less cost. So think continuous improvement. That always helps to put, and you empower your people to have the same mindset. You want to think about your customer management. How can you build a business that has no measured way that you engage with your customers? Not just from a profit point of view, but from an experiential point of view. So no matter the space you are, you want your customers to recognize that you value them, that you know that they are your bread and butter, so to speak, that you are interested in them. Go into understanding their industry and the things that are their own points of pain. Those could actually create more sustainable lines of business for you. Financing is key. So when we're talking about structure, from the early stages of business, I remember when I started, we just had one clerk who studied accounting somewhere. But I was determined that I must have some kind of record keeping because I knew it was part of the big vision I had in terms of building a sustainable business. And even though at that point, even the board I had at that point thought we couldn't afford an auditor, I insisted we should get an auditor. We found one, not any of the big ones, but to audit nonetheless. So you want to think about how you're keeping your books within the company. And it is never too early to start. Because one day, as it happened in my case, you are going to be faced with potential partners. We had a venture capital investment, one of the top venture capital firms that took equity in our business at some point. And the things that attracted them was how much structure, the processes were mapped out and documented, procedures were in place, documented, the financial management, everything was in place. We had even delegation of authority, whereby we knew who could approve what at different phases. And they were surprised, and that was one of the things that made them to invest. So when you start early, to make sure you're keeping the right record, and because we are kingdom people, we keep only one set of records, we show it as it is. You're making sure that all the backup, your audit trail is there, and so on and so forth. It's actually positioning for a potential point at which you can sell the business or get a partner that changes the trajectory of the business, right? So these are just some of the things I wanted to touch on. But when I think of my business, by the grace of God today, when people ask me, so what exactly are you building? I say to them that, look, one, I'm building a conglomerate, which means that I'm not focused on any, and yes, my primary industry is the energy space, but I see that opportunities can come. And even within that energy space, I see that there are opportunities that are yet to be mined and we must be positioned. So to me, you are building like a group of smart companies that we manage on global best practices. We may be a company in Nigeria, but that doesn't mean we cannot benchmark by, with the best. And we are certified to the best of global standards for quality management, for safety, for environmental, and all that, because that is the way we are looking at it. But it comes from the slow incremental steps that we started to take many years ago when people would even say to us things like, oh, your own is too much, this is a tiny company, you're acting as though you're a shell. Hey, well, today they're not saying that anymore. So we're committed to delivering long-term return on investments to our shareholders. But the caveat for us, because like I said, it's about the kingdom representation. We always say it's about doing this in an ethical and sustainable manner. And if you don't have the right fundamentals, one day the house is going to collapse. We want to be able to make tangible positive impact on the lives and communities that we operate in. This is important because when you're thinking structure, you also have to remember that you don't operate in a silo. You're situated in a community. So what kind of roles and responsibilities as a corporate will you engage that community with? You must be able to think about it in advance because they can make or mar your business. right? Now, so we are very intentional about delivering world-class performance. We don't joke with it. We want to always see ourselves as those who are contributing to moving the economy forward, to building capacity. So we're always training and retraining and all that. And a very strong system of governance and controls, financial controls, social models of excellence, and so on. So this is my vision for the company, that we are a company that people also benchmark on. And this is important to me because even as our vendors and subcontractors, we do a lot of training and education around this. So we know that today we have built an institution. I can walk away from my company. I don't have to be there on the day-to-day basis because the frameworks are there. The policies, all that are there. But we also have people that have capacity because we've developed them and we've given them the authority and the responsibility, the freedom to move the business forward in alignment with that strategic plan and the mission for the business. So there are many pillars, but it is a lot of work and it is intentional work, and it always correlates back to the vision. So we've talked about, and I want to kind of jump into restructuring because I feel that the same sets of things come in, whether you're just first trying to put the structure in place or you are being called to stop somewhere and restructure. And God knows that out of COVID, many of us had to restructure. Many of us had to do things very differently. But even without that, by God's grace, we put that aside, is the sensitivity to the market, to the industry, to what is happening with your customer. There are different things that can cause people to decide to restructure. And so what are the things we may be looking for? So first of all, if you have noticed that you have a lot of operational inefficiencies, there are always challenges in the organization. And it could even just be that you're always having people clashing with each other and you don't know why, right? It could be that there's something you need to restructure. I'll give you an example. In a very recent case that we had, actually, we had two people in two different job roles, but they were both reporting to the same person. And something within those job roles, I don't know how they internalized it, but each of them felt that they were responsible for that particular thing, even though it wasn't captured that way in their job descriptions. And so it was always a case of are you trying to take my job? Who is responsible for it? It was just such a mess. Eventually, we had to sit down and go back to look at the language to say, okay, let's rework this, let's rework that. And beyond that, we now found that we actually had to create a different line where the other person had to report differently. And that took care of the issue. So sometimes in the course of your business or anything, you pay attention to where are the challenges I'm seeing? Is there any inefficiency? Where is our pace of responding to issues slow? You know, as they say, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So no matter how great you built it, sometimes if you see that there are some things that keep recurring, you go and pay attention and you begin to look at it. It could be that a key man has left or a key woman, and you have to now think, how can I fill this gap? In many ways, in thinking about how to fill that gap, one of the things I recommend to is that you see that, okay, this particular position must always have a second position that is benchmarking it very closely. In our case, for instance, we had that kind of situation a few years ago. Even though we've always had a very clearly articulated succession plan where we are marking who are the two key successors to any position, we are training them and building capacity. And at this point in time, we really literally lost, I think, the first and the second two people. What do we do? What we had to do was go back to the entire organizational chart. And like I said, we always do future planning. So we have the organogram for today, we have the one for tomorrow. But business is dynamic. So we went back, we looked at it and realized that even in that future plan and in the current plan, we had to recreate that very top level. And it, of course, had impact for the succession plan. So what I'm trying to say is that in looking at your structure and restructuring, there's an element of adaptability that you must also factor in. Again, keep the vision. It's always that big picture. What are you building? Where are you going with this? And who is going to take the glory for what you're doing? Sometimes you have to restructure because maybe your company is merging or it's been acquired by someone to some degree. Like I said, we have had equity investors. And what that meant at that point was that even though as the owner of the business, there were some decisions I could no longer make, a new level was created between the executive management and the board. So we had what we call an executive committee. That changed the dynamics of many things, but it was work that we sat down, thought through, figured out, gave the responsibilities, figured how it would, interface with everything else, such that eventually when those investors exited, we had a recovery plan to go back to what existed before that came up. Sometimes it could be that the market has changed. I mean, our customers are dynamic. If your customers are young people, so if that's your core demographic, then you need to be paying attention to the fact that when those ones grow, there are generational differences, and those nuances may impact on how they interact with your products, right, or your service. So today we talk about millennial, Gen Z, Gen that. From a business point of view, you have to be as adaptable, and you may need to restructure, even if it is your marketing communication in this case, so that the messaging you have still makes sense to that other generation. You may have to look at the routes through which you push the messages. So now it is more social media, it's more apps, it's more, the best of brands are on TikTok now because there is a huge young audience that is their market target. So you want to rethink that. And sometimes when you have to rethink your marketing communication style, it may impact the people that you have. So restructuring is never about just one tiny thing. There is always a system-wide approach that you have to be paying attention to. Sometimes you need to restructure because there's been a change in government policy, and something that made sense and was legal and right to do within your business or industry is no more that. So you are paying attention. Or it could be that you want to downsize. So if you build this huge structure and things change and maybe technology comes that allows you to be more nimble, you also have to be intentional about how you restructure. You don't just throw people out, you don't just throw processes out. Again, it's the sitting down, it's the thinking through, being very strategic about what needs to happen. Many years ago, so my company, coming out of that whole experience with the venture capital partners, we had to, and we've been in business for many years, but we had to do what I called it then Project Gold, right? And that gold actually stood for God-ordained leadership development exercise. And the core objective was that, of course, we said we wanted to restructure so that we will further institutionalize our business processes, our practices, so that will lead to us becoming a fully system-dependent organization that will have the right kind of processes, properly motivated people at every level, leaders at every level, and allow us to be adaptable with the evolving undulations of our industry and the nation. What that meant was that we took different pillars of the business. We looked at our staff. Who are we going to need? Out of those that we have, who do we need? Who do we need to reinforce their skills? And who perhaps, do we not need to go forward with because their roles are no longer required, or because they have not demonstrated the capacity? And that's a bit of an emotional, difficult decision to make, but you have to have the fortitude when you are restructuring to make some hard decisions. We have to look at the business model itself and say, okay, what needs to shift? Where do we gain efficiencies? What do we need to add? What do we need to reinforce? We have to look at the skill set across board, including ourselves. So we instituted what we call the Falcon Academy, so that all our trainings till that time have been more on the technical. But at this time, we recognize that behavioral competencies, the softer side of things, that they actually had a way of impacting on how we did business, how we related with each other and with the market and so on. So there was a whole skills mining and revisiting that needed to happen. We looked at the systems we already had in place. What is working, what is not working? Do we need an ERP? Do we not need an ERP, an enterprise resource plan software? Or are there things that we can internally generate in terms of the processes using the apps and software we already have to recreate some of our processes for efficiencies? We looked at our business strategy. Like with what has happened now, where are we going? Do we need to adapt? Do we need to evolve and all that? What's the direction of the business given what was happening at that point in time? And so on and so forth. So it was a very robust and rounded process that took us quite a few months to do. We looked at different dimensions and then came to the place of positioning ourselves for where we are today. So structuring and restructuring is intentional. It can be a bit time consuming, but it is well worth it, because your mandate is to build an institution, not just to run a mom and pop store. And even if you choose to run a mom and pop store, Perhaps you want to be the most efficient, most respected mom and pop shop that you can shop that can be handed over to the next generation. You want to even think about things like what kind of structure. We have to look at that. A lot of our contemporaries were well, not necessarily in the industry, but people who had operated for as many years as we had, they were beginning to flatten out their organizational structures, kind of make it like everybody is just everybody, manager, know this, know that. But we had to step back and say, our industry is a bit formal, and you want to pay attention to some of those nuances. So we stepped away from that. But for some people, it could be that you want to flatten it out a bit because of where you are, what your customer needs, all those things I talked about in terms of what is shifting around you. All right. And of course, the thing with structure and restructuring is that you don't do it by yourself. This is not something you as the entrepreneur just sits down and you take all the decisions and you come and pass it on to your people. That doesn't work. You will lose some good people, you will frustrate some great people, and you will just confuse everybody, sometimes including yourself. So the best way to do it, and this for us has worked for years, is to engage with your people. Like sit them down. The best of ideas for me have always come from my people. Talking about what the business needs to do, talking about where the business needs to go, talking about the changes that need to happen, even those hard conversations around the fact that we may have to let some people go and bring people in. It is easier when there's honesty, when there's transparency, so they understand what is happening. And especially where you as an entrepreneur, there's no nepotism. So they're not seeing you holding on to your cousins and all that while you are busy firing other people that are not related to you. And of course, in this place, then, part of putting your structure in place, every time you want to shift any of the elements, you want to think about change management, how best you can get people to champion what you're doing. Because I can tell you something, it's actually usually easier for them to buy in when it's coming from one of them themselves. So always think about this as a business person, as an entrepreneur. I'm building something that is sustainable from the perspective of kingdom, which is still Jesus comes, it's transgenerational. I want to keep creating value. I want to keep dispensing value. I want the light of this business to so shine that God is glorified in the marketplace, which means I want to be thinking operational excellence. I want to be mindful of the quality of my product. What do you do? What do you have in place when the price of your inputs is escalating and you still want to be able to deliver value to your customers without compromising on quality? Well, there are different technologies and techniques of value engineering, right? And so you look into that, then you begin to document, okay, we need to do this. Sometimes you can save a lot of money by, changing the color of the packet of your product while retaining the color of your logo. I've heard that before. So it's again just thinking about what needs to happen. You ask yourself, what are the best practices in my industry? Which ones is my business mature enough to adopt at this time? And for anyone you want to adopt, again, engage your people and do the change management. You want to ask yourself, how is my customer interacting with me? And how do we do better? That's a big part of maintaining excellence. When you listen more to the customer, in our case, we touch base with our customers in a formalized way, right? We do a customer survey twice a year and then take the results of that. We allow them to be deep about whatever issues they may have. And then we send teams to engage with them to see how we can do better. Even when they have told us what we've done well, we still continue to engage because that customer focus is part of you ensuring continuity, sustainability. And a lot of the time, the best of your ideas in terms of new opportunities can actually come from your customers. All right, I've talked a lot about people, so I'm going to leave it at the fact that you have to remember that God says that we are called to love our neighbors, right? As we love ourselves. And I always say that for those of us who are entrepreneurs, our easiest neighbors are our staff. So you want to put in place structures and processes that ensure your people are happy, that they're engaged, that they love to come to work. One, because they know what they're coming to work for, so the plan is clear, it's well communicated to them, their job descriptions are crisp. You have a lot of things that create the fun side of the business, whether it's First Friday, movie night, CGI, whatever you call it, those things that allow them to be people and human. You allow them to build capacity. You step away even in your meetings, delegate, so that your people can build the capacity to run the business in your absence. You don't always have to be the one speaking, even in meetings you are in. Train your people, put a training framework in place. If you can't even afford to spend money on all the training outside, you have relationships you can leverage on and occasionally ask them to come and speak to your people and to train them on some aspect or the other. What you want to do is to do two core things. Create a sense of ownership in your people, and this comes by working in an increasingly structured organization. And you also want to make sure that there's a succession pipeline. And because they can see their trajectory within the organization, where there is a future organogram, as I referred to earlier, they are not resistant to your attempts to put a succession plan in place. Now, one of the biggest things that comes in the conversation around structure and restructuring is governance. You must have a governance framework in place. You see, as entrepreneurs, because we are the decision makers, and in many cases, we are owner managers, so we are the be-all, we are the end-all. Unfortunately, what that means is that we also bring our gaps and our shortcomings into that space. No matter how great you are as a leader, we're all flawed human beings, right? And when you now have the power to decide everything, if you're not careful, we may actually find ourselves in a place where we optimize processes and potentials of our business. We may even constrain opportunities completely. So part of that checkmating of ourselves is to see whether we can put a board in place, whether it's an advisory board or a full board of directors that you are accountable to. That puts a bit of a check on our excesses. That also forces us to be able to think and engage and build capacity as owners ourselves, because we have to go and project the things we're trying to do and defend them to a board and be, in conformance with whatever they say. A board will also help you to ensure that you're always looking at the compliance part of your business. Those of us who are kingdom marketplace ministers, we have no business absolutely being among the ones that don't pay taxes, that dodge licenses and permits because we don't want to spend money, or that call people to start asking them to reduce something and we give them a little kickback. God forbid. That is not brand Jesus, that is not brand kingdom. So compliance is enforced when you have a board of the right kind of people who are also holding you accountable, and then you deal with your personal accountability to God. So I think this is really important from a governance point of view. You yourself as the owner manager, are you accountable to the business? Are you still dipping your hand in the business finances? Are you still making decisions on the fly? One of the best parts of putting your SOPs, having clear, crisp policies, having your finances and structure and giving people responsibility is that there are some things, even though you own the business, you can't just do on your whim. Ask yourself constantly, if I wasn't the one managing the business, let's say I own this business and I hired somebody to run this business for me, what are my expectations of that person? Document those things and hold yourself accountable. A good part of putting structure in your business is ever increasing the extent and level of your personal accountability to the right things to do by your business. All right. And again, making sure that you are not the one that are, you sign the policies and procedures for other people to obey, and then you are the one shooting them in the foot. What that means is that you're actually not working in integrity. What that means is that your people actually, all that work you're doing, they see it as a house of cards that can crumble once Oga or Madam, just has a different view because they don't even comply with the things that they put in place. So you yourself are a key part of the structure you want your business to adopt. You are the one that will set the tone for culture. You are the one that would, especially if you're positioning yourself as someone who is carrying the glory of God, someone that is a kingdom, a glory carrier, yeah? So if you are the one that does things that make your people say, and she calls herself a Christian, I mean, I don't know what structure you're building, and I don't know what legacy you're living. So you always want to think about the way I embrace the different facets of my business is part of the structure, actually, because it creates a culture. And you know that culture can kill anything. We said that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? You can have the best strategy. If the culture in the organization is toxic, if it is slow, if it is just, all scattered, your best of strategies and all these things won't add up to anything. So always think about governance. Always think about how do I institutionalize. A big part of structure, for instance, is setting up a budget. Every year, making sure that you are planning towards the next year and putting a budget in place. Sometimes young entrepreneurs say to me, oh, but ma'am, I don't really know, my cash flows are not yet established, so I don't really know how to budget. I'm like, okay, you know what, even if you just did an expenditure budget, that's even a good starting place, because the reality is that you will buy diesel in our own context, you will pay some bills, you will do this, you will do that, you will pay salaries. Even just the discipline of articulating what your annual spend might be on a monthly basis, it has a way of putting, a certain framework around the business. And if you then have a sort of sense of the kinds of pipeline of projects you're chasing, or you've gotten to the place where you have a steady flow of income, budgeting helps you to think through end to end how this business will perform in this year. When am I going to need a short-term loan or an overdraft or something? Where am I going to have excess cash that I can now invest? As I said earlier, even if it is a 4-3-day window or it's a 1-month window, to create added value and income for myself, for the business, and so on and so forth. So having those kinds of things in place then make for structure. And it's all work. The one thing that everything I've said lands on the altar of work. When we're talking about building legacy businesses, especially the kind that God can take glory from, it ends on the altar of work. We have to do the work. But the beauty is that we have the resources, we have the leadership of the Holy Spirit, because He Himself can just give you some strategies that you couldn't have found on any Google or any search engine platform. He Himself can give you the kind of resources by way of people you just come into contact with, or even within your organization. You can just put an idea in someone's heart that can change the way that the company stands. So it's very important that we're thinking about the long term, and we're thinking, what are the things that I need to do to ensure that my business is strong and sustainable into the long term. As I begin to wrap up, part of the things you want to think about, especially because we're talking kingdom, is your partners, the quality of your partners, your strategic alliances. Who are you, as we say, getting in bed with? We don't want a situation where we just want to partner with people because we see the dollar signs, but we know that this partnership is going to create compromises. So even putting in place something that allows you to say that these are the kind of people we partner with, these are the kind of people we say no to, is part of that, because many businesses have crumbled because they partnered with people who ultimately were unethical, did something that's eroded, their brand value, and it impacted on everyone. So you want to think about that too. You want to think about the fact that we're global now. So your partnerships don't always have to be in one place. If you want to take your business into some other part of the world, are you thinking about who you can partner with? You don't have to go set up an office there. There's franchising and stuff like that. So being able to think about structure from the perspective of, as this business grows, how am I going to scale it? There's an element of my business, for instance, my gas business, where we have clearly identified that the best way to scale, the way we want to scale based on the vision we have for that line, is by franchising. And that's the model that, honestly, we've been doing a deep dive drilling to develop the systems and policies and procedures that will support that business ever before we launch out. I hope I'm back on. Excellent. All right, thank you. Thank you. All right, so these are the things that I wanted to share at this point in time in terms of how we build structure for our businesses. And to say that, again, the structure conversation is important because you want to build those brands that glorify, you want to build the transgenerational brands, and you want to make sure that all your efforts don't just land on the altar of when you die. That's the end of the matter. So I look at my company today and I see personally, God has been faithful. We've been diligent and God has been faithful. I'm seeing a company that is literally living out the vision. We're working out that mission to just glorify God. So we're very strong on our social responsibility. We don't compromise on ethics. We've lost a lot of seemingly great opportunities because we are clear what we are doing, right? It's a company that has a great management team with very strong governance. My people, I just love them. In fact, they challenge me constantly, but they also give me peace because I know that they have the capacity so that even if I step out fully right now, the business can continue to grow. And that, I think, is what every entrepreneur's dream is, or should be, even if you're just starting, right? We have great, this is everything we've done has been 100% Nigerians. I'm always very proud of that because, to build and grow a business in Nigeria to the level we have, it's not easy, right? But we have great relationships with our stakeholders, with the industry. We have a brand, very good, strong brand, but it was a lot of work. And we saw that brand was one of the pillars of our structure, our legacy conversation. So we've been very intentional about promoting and defending the brand. We've reworked our business models, what works for today, and we have a very aggressive growth trajectory. But there is an element of flexibility we've tried to embed because out of the last few years, we have seen that things can shift. Strategy is no more static, it's very much evolving, and you have to be dynamic. The word I think we use now is agile, so that your company and all your efforts don't just collapse because something shifted. We're very focused on quality. So like I said earlier, ISO certified, we're very strict on safety and so on and so forth. And for us, we feel that the future is bright. When I look at my business and what God has helped me to do, it is from there that I have the confidence and the desire, the zeal to continuously show up at conversations like this to encourage other entrepreneurs and say this. First, you can do this. I don't have two heads, and neither do the Mercedes, Coca-Cola people that were my own benchmark. Secondly, and maybe that's even the first actually, is that God expects it of you, that you are on assignment, as I've said, and that's the biggest picture. Therefore, God's assignment cannot be handled in a casual way. God himself is a God of systems and structures. Everything in the world is connected. The first time I heard the concept of reflexology, I was amazed that at the base of somebody's foot, there are parts of the foot that connect with your liver, your kidney, your this, your that. Finding out that if I had a headache, there's a part of my palm I can press and the headache goes, because God is that mindful. The water goes from the land back into the air, back onto the land. It's a cycle. God connected the dots. Therefore, even your business is a connected dot. It's part of the mandate, it's part of the assignment, and you have to think about it like that. Think about how God will be glorified. Think about it from a system approach. God gave us times, seasons, very systematic, very intentional, very structured God. So whatever it will take, whatever knowledge is required from forums such as this, or from other learning resources that are available, is for us to come and do the work in partnership with the Spirit and, of course, in partnership with our people. And lastly, I just want to put this out there, again, because we are kingdom people, that as we do all this work of building businesses that are structured, as we sometimes have to pause and step back from what we've done and restructure our businesses, our processes, our frameworks, and all that. And God takes us in that place where we are more efficient and more profitable. Please let's remember that in essence, there is a purpose behind the profit. It is kingdom. It is the place where we're giving back. It is the place where we recognize that this assignment wasn't just about us, but it was literally to bless and impact humanity and for the glory to go back to God. So I'm going to anchor at this point and say thank you. I hope that this has been useful to you. And I'm always happy, to reach out and connect with like-minded entrepreneurs so that we have these conversations and challenge ourselves constantly to keep raising the bar for the kingdom of God. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and God bless you all. Thank you, Pastor Tola.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Audrey. My goodness, I can literally, and I mean that, listen to you every day. I'm telling you. I mean you. And what I love about your presentation is that it was not, theoretical at all. It was from a place of what you've worked on, what you've seen over the years. You understand? And how God has been able to help you to get to where you are now. So once again, on behalf of GLC, we say thank you to us. We are going to be going to the session of questions and answers now. And some of our questions have come in. And if you still have any question for Ms. Audrey, please send in the questions. Anchoring this session will be our executive pastor of Jesus House, Baltimore, Pastor Bumi Banjo. So I'm going to allow her to come on now, and then she'll start taking the questions. And after the questions and the answers, I'll come back on and we'll wrap up this first session. Please don't go anywhere. Pastor Leke Alder is going to come and round this up with us. And he knows his onions. He understands what branding is all about. So please don't go anywhere. Pastor B, it's time for you to come on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pastor Tola. Thank you so much, Mrs. Joe-Ezigbo, for such a powerful, phenomenal, enlightening, empowering session. Just like Pastor Tola said, I could go on and on listening to you as well as you share your wealth in the marketplace, in your own journey as an entrepreneur. Thank you so very much. I know I echoed the gratitude from everybody who's a participant on this platform today. As Pastor Tola said, we have some questions that have come in, touching on the topic that Mrs. Joe-Ezigbo has been taking, entrepreneurial structure and restructuring. And you can still please feel free to continue to send your questions via the chat in the platform that you're watching from. So Mrs. Joe-Ezigbo, we have a few questions here that I feel are going to be very, very practical in nature. And I'm going to start with one of such. Okay, so from building from an SME to a large corporation, which you've done, this has been your experience, you must have encountered many curveballs and learning curves and issues, and for you to be able to actually arrive at a position where the structure is now, sustaining itself and your journey is on to build a legacy. Can you share with us some of the mistakes that you've made, and how you've learned from them?
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So I will give you an example. Wow, each time I remember this example, I'm just so grateful to God. I am a microbiologist. My first degree is in microbiology. Never mind that I'm now Madam Gas. And my husband is a medical parasitologist. So literally, two of us had no business in the energy space if it was just based on that. Mm-hmm. And when we started the business, we really didn't have a clear assignment. We just jumped in, right? It's like, oh, oil and gas industry, let's go. And then we came in. I remember, and I mean, this is a Jesus matter, so I always like to tell I'm very authentic about the messages I made. And when we came in, the first profile we ever had, we had seen some other company profiles. We just collect a few jobs, you see this people offer this service, this other service, you combine everything together and say this is a company profile. And it was so bad, my sister, that I later found out that one of the things we listed as a service was actually a chemical. We're novices, we knew nothing. So it was just like, what are the high sounding services we see? And I can imagine then somebody who is a real industry person looking at this profile and shaking their head and saying, no, this was the way did they come from, right? So there was that, like, not having a clear path. But we came in, and at some point we started to try to get registered within the Shell, Mobil, Elf, all the oil companies to be able to offer services. And we felt, maybe because we felt inadequate in ourselves, in a sense is what I was saying now, we decided to hire some young man who was an engineer. Now, when we decided we needed an engineer, it wasn't because we had stepped back and said, I need an engineer to do this. And that's why I talked about even looking at my business is going, what will I need? Because that way you'll be more intentional. No, this was actually just a case of somebody had come and cried to us that, oh, her husband is graduated, he doesn't have a job, he's very intelligent, she's the one carrying all the bills. And in that emotional stage, we're like, Chebi is an engineer, oh yeah, come.
Huh.
You understand? So being there, done that, all these things I'm saying, I've made him say, you know what I'm saying. So we hired him, and the fact that he was an engineer, just immediately we assumed he knew this guy has not worked for one day. But we made him an executive director of operations, big title, he felt the hell. When he goes to meetings and they say he's an executive director of operations, then he's commanding respect. Absolute nonsense. He had no experience. And we didn't even do, let's even say I need an engineer. Throw it out and interview different people and get the best. No, we didn't do that. We just ran with emotional. We didn't know anything about this guy. We didn't know anything about his value system. Why did this become a problem? Because we stopped going for the meetings now. We started to send him. Sometimes he'll come, we used to go to Lagos for this meeting. We that had no money, the little we had, we will send him. Write your reports. No reports. Retire your accounts. He will not. It was just a constant conversation. Now, at some point, somebody said, look, there's this company that is looking for a representative, and we think you people will be good. So we said, okay, we didn't go for the meeting, we sent him. This young man went there and presented himself as the company, right? And then what would happen was that he was not giving reports and all that. He was now beginning to act funny. Sometimes he won't show up in the office for weeks and tell us that he was networking and discussing with people, and we're paying his salary, mind you.
Wow.
Now, what happened one day, because he had now become an issue, we had to report it to the board. So this one day, he had supposedly gone to Lagos for a business deal, and he had told us he was expecting something. When it came, it was addressed to the managing director. So of course, I opened the mail, and that's where we saw that the contract for the representation was between him as a person and the company. Now, to be fair, in all innocence and with open heart, we just assumed, oh, the people made a mistake. So we sent them a fax. Those were the days of faxing, to say, oh, thank you, we've received the contract, but you made a mistake. You didn't put our company name, you put, and they replied to say, no, they are not transacting with us. He came back, they started yelling at myself and my husband, how dare we open his personal mail? Wow,
because he's the MD.
So we had given him too much free, he wasn't the MD, but that's what we asked him, that you're not.
In his mind.
Yeah, there was nothing in place to there was no, we had no frameworks. All we knew is he's an engineer, just go. And then he ended up, those people refused to back away. They signed up with him, even though the business, of course, something happened along the line and they fell out with him and withdrew it. But that for us would have been a game changer, right? But that came from not having those clear responses, even how you hire. Who are you hiring? There was no recruitment process, nothing to say, this is how we filter people, nothing. It was a lot of emotional issues. That's one big example. But God is wise, right? So he takes our mistakes. God has always told me that, Audrey, I'll redirect your errors. So even the things we thought were mistakes, we thank God. Because maybe if they had given it to us, we'll still be in Port Harcourt now and we will not be doing what we're doing. So who knows? That's one. Secondly, I remember that at some point I had this HR person, and I think that somehow, because each time this lady would present to me, honestly, she was always talking about the staff in a very positive light, always talking about how we can grow them, build them. And I realized that later, reflecting on this, maybe I should have paid a little attention to some of the niggling sense, because my instincts are very strong. But in this case, because it was always being presented as something positive, I ignored this, and I shouldn't have. And we hadn't yet put in place a 360 performance appraisal system. So it was still that traditional top-down appraisal. What I found out later was that this woman was literally terrorizing the staff. And I mean in a major way, to the degree of the kind of language she used with them, language I would never use, insulting F words, those kinds of things, nothing representing brand me. And because she reported directly to me and she had created this sense that nobody else could come to me, nobody could talk about it. But, when I started to sense, okay, we need to change this, and we put that in place, the results that came out didn't look anything So that was it. So that putting that in place is very important. As entrepreneurs, we have to be careful because people are always trying to game us. Everybody wants to, there's a lot of politicking, everybody wants to be your guy, your girl, they want to be your good corner, so to speak. So we must be mindful to test the system, because if we create too many layers between us and our people, these types of things could happen. Ultimately, of course, when I got the report and I tested it and I told them to be tried, let her go immediately. Some organizations don't do that because the person is in senior leadership, right? They would have said, no, you can't lose. It's not easy to recruit at that level. But for me, my personal integrity was key, that the policy said this, and at any level, that's what would apply. And so she had to go. But when I look back, I do feel that I dropped the ball on that. If I paid more attention, and we've been talking about this 360 for a while, so I think it was one of those delayed actions that now cost me greatly. And it took years to rebuild trust in my people, where they didn't feel I was that person that she had given them the sense that I was, right? So there's that. Lastly, as an example, is just in terms of maybe the business line now, that we had one experience where we had a business we wanted to do, and we were trying too hard to do it within the ambit of the resources we already had. What was a new line, and literally stepping back and saying, what were you thinking? I mean, these people this was strange to them, and they were already busy with what they were doing. It would have made sense to resource that role from the beginning and think of that not as a cost to the business, but as an investment to a possible future opportunity. But we didn't do that. We were just looking at how much, it would be too expensive, and let's just try and do it by ourselves. Ultimately, that thing cost us like $500 million in a loss. That was not funny. And at the end of the day, I said to myself that probably the payroll of the person who could have had the capacity to ensure that did not happen might have been a fifth of that, Wow. And so the recovery, of course, we've done the recovery now, but it was a hard lesson. And sometimes I sit back and I imagine, I don't know if you know how much the dollar rate is now. I sit back and I imagine sometimes that, wow, assuming we had even bought dollars with that money, I'd have been in the Bahamas by now.
We learn, we live and we learn.
Yes,
and thank you so very, very much, Mrs. Joe-Ezigbo. You were just going all over the questions that some of our attendees have asked, because somebody asked the question and said trust is an issue for both small and large organizations, and they were wondering, how do you tackle this as a young entrepreneur when you're hiring talent? I think you've touched on it, but maybe you just want to say one or two things.
Yes. So that's such a real question, because the world we're in, the value system is grossly eroded, and this has been so for a while, more so now. I think that the devil is very busy, and the psyche of people is very, very busy, but because he knows his time is coming to an end anyway. So it's really hard, but not impossible. I feel that what you put out gravitates more towards you. And that has been my experience. I'm not saying that I've had a seamless HR people experience in these 28 years, not so. I've had some hard knocks. But guess what? In this period, I've had people that have worked for me for 22 years. I've had people that have worked for me for 16, and I've had those that stayed 3 months and didn't even, they just collected salary and disappeared, and at different levels for that matter. So, but when you are a young business, you must be able to trust that you have good people. And it starts from when you're hiring. So how do you hire? Right? We stopped hiring directly and started to go through recruiters. They look like an add-on cost, but they do a lot more filtering, so that by the time the last batch are coming to you, I think I'm dealing with the cream of the crop. And they were now testing for technical skills that, to me, honestly, well, depending on the role, a lot of the time the technical skills are given would have tested it, teachers would have tested that. So when we interview, our interviews don't really start with, we always tell the first thing we tell you in an interview is tell us about yourself and describe yourself in the essence of who you are, nothing to do with your CV. I don't want to hear where you went to school. I don't want to hear anything about your work experience, because those things are great, but I'm going to work with the person. And we get into conversation. Yes, where are you coming from? What's your vision for life? What do you think about, even as simple as what do you think about what's going on in Ukraine? Just things you're trying to test, you're listening for things. And people, when they now get into that relaxed mode, people drop the strangest things on you. Somebody has in an interview, actually, she didn't even know when she said it, when, that's why I now just removed like 3 years from my CV.
Oops.
Just on my age. I was like, oops, I'm like, and we don't recruit in a hurry. Then we also do personality assessment tests. We use, the different things you can use to do that, because we want to get a sense of the person. We're going to work with people. Do these things all mean 100%? No, but they kind of reduce that possibility.
Right. Yes.
Now, the second thing is this. Let me just put it out there that unfortunately, and this is so sad, if your only criteria is that the person is born again and goes to your church, you'll be shocked. All that. Fortunately, this is our truth. So you still do the science of it, please. We're not all to the church or the hospital, so many people there are still under treatment. So we don't just assume.
And that is true.
Yeah, so that's also important. And we wear all these filters, we make mistakes, and then make mistakes that we say everybody can be trusted is not true. Now, when you now bring people, you spend a lot of time sharing the mission, the vision, what is driving us, what are we trying to do, where are we going, what do we want, how do we want to work with you? And then we attach, where we can, a mentor, usually someone more tested. You may not be able to attach a mentor if you're a young business, but you could also have friends that come in. Years back, I used to go, I have some friends running smaller organizations that would always call me to have sessions with their people, and I will speak to their people around how do you situate yourself in the vision of this company, because sometimes hearing it from an outsider, they accept it more than this person. I also think that it's important with how we treat our people. We must respect people. Everybody is God valued. Everybody is the head of household somewhere, a human being on assignment. When you have that whole respectful, honoring thing around your people, you'll be surprised. You'll be surprised. At least even if there are 10, all 10 of them can't decide to just, no, there will be one person that will be calling and saying, no, not this, my madam. No, let's not do that, right? It's not a perfect, because this is the world we're in. But I think when you're a bit more grounded about how you bring them in, who you are bringing in, how you engage them, and you can show people that I value you. So, my husband, for instance, would always tell people, listen, you could be the CEO in this organization. And, maybe some people will just like, yeah, right. But guess what? I've had someone that came in as just front desk that ended up as my HR manager. So we have those live cases to say, okay, this person came in as that, look where they are today. And people trust that. The other thing is, one of the reasons why people perhaps don't trust is the way we ourselves behave. Check your conduct. Check your conduct. If you're coming with this, I'm the boss forever, and people don't, excuse me, moving on, right? And then lastly, I would say that thing I said about the organization structure from a human perspective, your organogram today, how do I see myself? Because there are a lot of owner-managed businesses where, unless you're a family member, you can't get past a certain place. When people come into that kind of a system, there's no sense of ownership. And that means that, if there are places where they can game the system, they may do that. But when they can see a growth trajectory, you have a proper salary scale, even if you're still struggling to pay that salaries, you've created it, trusting God, this is how it's going to work. People can see that you're planning for their growth, right? It's easier. For them to say, okay, let me settle in. Yeah. Now, the only caveat I have to all this is that we also have a new generational issue, which is that we have a crop of young people whose context, I always tell people, don't be telling me, oh, they are not, they don't know how to stay. There's some negative connotations towards the way young people are. And I say this, no, it's not negative. It is that their context is totally different. It's totally different. So they are not hanging in there for 30 years with you. They give you 3 months, they give you 6 months, they give you 1 year, and to them they have served. And that's their context. And some companies have learned how to mine that so that it's an ever-evolving, shifting pool. And if you have your SOPs for each position, you don't feel it as much. Or you decide that, okay, for some strategic positions, I don't want anyone over 35 because I need stability. There's a way to do these things, right? And once once you get past that sense of, oh, they just leave, they just take my idea and leave because that's what you see. It may not be that. It may just be that you're dealing with younger people who what is driving them is different from what is driving you.
Wow,
right?
wow.
I trust God. I trust God. I tell God that, you know what, Lord, I'm doing this work with you. And because I'm doing it with you, and because I'm trying to intentionally build structure, I'm trying to intentionally make my people know I value and honor them. I cannot do this without them. Then no matter who hurts me or hurts the business and leaves, you will bring better. You own 7 billion.
I love that. You will bring better. You will bring better. Wow, where did time go? I think we just have about 3-4 minutes left. Let's see if we can get maybe like 2 questions into that before we wrap up the Q&A session. You talked about value, and that just ties me into the next question. Somebody asked, what elements are necessary to translate shared assumptions within an organization into a shared culture? How we do things, our norms and our values within this organization. How do you translate that and communicate it to your staff?
So again, it's a whole exercise. It's a whole exercise. And usually, if you can, I would always encourage, if you have a proper HR department, they can champion this. If not, get the consultants that partner with you. We have a lot of organizations that work with people to do this. Well, I love that word, shared assumptions, because that's the assumptions that operate within a system, especially where there is no structure. You'll be amazed with things people just, and it becomes almost like dogma.
That's right.
So by the time you as a CEO hear some things, you'll be like, sorry. So, but we want to build culture. At the very early stages where maybe you have a very small team, you're less than 10, you are the one that is the champion. You set the pace. You are always speaking to the issues, and you are celebrating when people align. I think this is the thing that we may sometimes miss. Or you create a reward system, and rewards at that level have nothing to do with like give a financial reward. It could just be that, you know, everybody's screensaver that day is my picture, employee of the month, or well done, great job. You write a commendation letter, call them out, they take a picture with madam, you know, and you get to show that. Yes, you know, you're going on
bragging rights.
Yeah, things that make people feel good, and you're telling them, and what you are celebrating is that you did this. I love it. Yeah. Right? Many years ago, for instance, he's late now. He was a driver. His name was Enunu. But Enunu got so involved with the engineers that they used to call him driver engineer. Wow. And he got to the point where he started to understand some of the little things like tightening of the knots on the valve pit, that they started to send him on those assignments. The first time he saw something, a bit of a leakage, I think he sensed there was a leakage and went by himself, tightened it first, then reported it. We had a huge commendation ceremony around him, a driver. So there are some of those things that you do, and you're setting the tone so people know that truly this thing they're saying about we value our people, that you are saying it. But as you grow bigger and bigger, you can't always be in the doing. You just make sure that your culture, the way you interact with your staff, respect, you greet people, you engage. When you have meetings, you let them speak. You're not interrupting. You're not afraid to say, look, I don't know this. Can you explain? I'd like to get your views. People feel engaged. Yeah. But you want to filter it down is, again, you have to put the policies in place. You have to do the change management that is involved, and let it be something that is continuously, we're looking at it constantly to say, are we all on the same page? Set up your town halls, employee town halls, and don't attend. Let them talk.
Wow, wow.
Yeah,
So let me go into this question, Mrs. Joe-Ezigbo. That was powerful, because that leads me into perhaps the final question we'll be able to take in this session. That was powerful. So somebody is asking, because you talked about organizational change management, right? And somebody said, how and when do you communicate organizational changes across all internal, that is your leaders, your employees, system, and external system as well, such as like your stakeholders and your clients? How do you communicate, and when do you communicate? Yes.
Right. So the communication happens at different stages. I think at the beginning, when you're trying to figure out what even needs to be done, you engage at the senior leadership level mostly, because we're just discussing the very strategic issues. But of course, when we want to drill down a bit more, you have to engage with everybody so that as early as possible, people know we're looking at the business. But by the time you have walked through and agreed, this is exactly what we're changing, this is the strategy to implement, you must have a town hall and do that deep dive. Because the way you will explain that to the head of your operations, they will internalize it differently from your head of logistics, who is just a fancy word for your senior driver. So that is important, and especially where people are impacted. Right, so there are different phases of the communication, and if you're going to let anyone go in the process, oh wow, as early as possible, that communication must happen. They don't want to find out after it's done, because people will be afraid and uncertain, and they will not trust any other thing you're saying, especially if you mistakenly announced at the beginning that I promise you no one will be going.
Wow.
So even how you communicate, what you communicate, you have to be very careful, because if you can't really see the end yet, be careful what you're promising at the beginning.
Wow. So uncertainty is not a conducive environment.
No.
Thank you so very much. We wish we could take all the questions. We do have more questions, and we probably will be reaching out to you if you'll be gracious to please answer those questions for us. We will endeavor to put them on the GLC website so that people can refer back to those questions and the answers that go with them. We thank you again, Mrs. Audrey Joe-Ezigbo, for your time, for your knowledge share. It's been pretty powerful and transforming. Thank you so very, very much.